Okay, this is my video for domain 4, communication network security. Um, basically this is going to involve this domain covers stuff that involves how and what of communications. So everything from network ports and the OSI model to different network devices, different types of firewalls, things like that. I didn't include all this stuff in here, just like with all the other domains. It's meant to be very brief. I do have some links in my GitHub page that will take you down the rabbit hole for domains, respectively, and some of the things you might need to know. So, with that, let's get started. Already mentioned the elevator pitch. The first topic, the OSI model, all the different 7 layers. So you'll see here application, presentation, session, transport, network, data link, and physical. A lot of people use acronyms. The one I've remembered all this time, it was all people seem to need data processing. And I mentioned here like which each of the layers do. The thing you got to remember when you're working with different types of communication from one thing to another, you're not going to see things go. It's not linear necessarily. So, for instance, if like the stuff I'm doing on GitHub, I'm updating stuff on here, uploading files, and the web browser is kind of your application layer. The different file formats and things, and down to the ASCII text, are in a separate layer, in the presentation layer. And then my session, keeping it open with my connection. All those things kind of interact, but they're not necessarily. It's not necessarily going in order as you connect. Sometimes you're kind of hopping between a layer 2 here or a layer 2. But you're not going to need to know all of that. You literally understand the order of the OSI model and what each of the layers do, and definitely understand some of the protocols in those. With that comes with where the different network devices come in each of the layers, particularly layers 1 through 3. So you got your hubs and repeaters in layer 1 that only do provide a simple connection. Your switches, your different circuits, and stuff like that'd be in layer 2, along with your bridges, and routers are going to be your layer 3. Another thing you'll need to know, you don't need to know all the RFC numbers, thankfully, but there's a lot. That's where the documentation is and this stuff. And I've got those sources in the links below. But your RFC 1918, that is your RFC or request for comment that designates your private address space. Your RFC is basically just like a list of different standards for communications. If you want to go down the rabbit hole, understand little stuff like more about SSL and TLS, there's a bunch of different RFC comments or requests for comments that describe them in depth. They're a fun, scintillating read. But with that RFC 1918, and you'll see this, if you're inside of a network in your office or whatever, it's typically going to be on one of these that's these IP address spaces are reserved for internal networks. So you're not going to really find anything if you ping a 10.0.1.2 outside of a private network. Like your home networks, if you buy your average router, for instance, your Class C, they're designed for small Class C networks. So your 192.1. I every now and then will play around with the last 2 octets on what I want to do. Like in my old place, a network I was on set up, just the home network, not really an office network. The home network, it wasn't the 192.1. It was a different sub. And you'll notice this maybe on a slightly larger scale, not on your home network, but if you look at you dig around and find your cable modem's IP, it's probably going to be somewhere in this, depending on, unless it's public facing. Most every company I've worked in, whether it be large or small, basically anything under, I don't know, anything over about 1,000, anything over 500 people I've worked at, they've gone to the Class A spaces. Depending on, they plan this stuff out for growth. So you don't want to box yourself in the corner with a Class C IP subnets when you end up growing into some massively large company. and there might be other devices, like especially if you're doing stuff with IoT, or you have not just people using their computers or servers, but you have hardware and things like that, or devices that have their own IP address. Um, but you're not going to have to go that deep. Literally, just understand what's in these IP ranges, and you're good to go. And then on top of that, your IP address classes. So understand what a Class A network is. B and C. Out of all the tests, and not just CISSP, but even the times I've tried CCNA and didn't pass, from way back when that was kind of more my interest. I don't remember, and mind you, the CCNA one was like 20 years ago. I didn't really see many questions with Class D and E addresses, so I don't include it, and I don't want to bog you down with a lot of information you're not going to need. Highly doubt you're going to see anything on Class D and E. The next one, and this is one I say often, that comes up that I consistently ask in interviews along with coworkers, for especially security related roles. Out of all the junior and sometimes mid level roles, we asked to explain a TCP three-way handshake. If you happen to stumble on this channel and you're looking to get in security or be coming up for an interview, definitely get a good understanding of it. Some people, like, in most cases, if the interviewer just gives me a synac ack, that's usually suffices as okay, you kind of understand the basics. But some people will go into like really in depth with it. There's a GitHub page out there somewhere where somebody explained an internet connection or TCP handshake down to typing stuff in the input on the keyboard, going to like where it like all the stuff. Like it went to ridiculous detail. I'll have to find that. You'll see some stuff on different types of firewalls and how they work. One question I do like asking: the difference or the benefit, the pros and cons of using, more specifically, the pros of using a layer 4 versus layer 7 rule. And a layer 4 rule, if you have specific traffic you want to identify by a port, hey, great. Especially if you're using a non-standard port for something. And then, for your layer 7, if it's based on the footprint of the application rather than a specific port, because a lot of these applications, SharePoint, will use a lot of dynamic ports. So you don't necessarily want to use a specific set of ports for something that's going to change its ports, and next thing you know, your application doesn't. So that's the quick end of the pros and cons of layer 4 and layer 7 rules. You're probably not going to be asked those questions. I highly doubt it's going to be some weird scenario thing. So definitely understanding anything IP related, whether it be the classes and the address spaces, will help. Different types of firewalls, those questions on the practice exam have definitely tripped me a bit, and understanding OSI layer. Let's see. As far as ports, network ports. So, like I said, there's 65,000 ports. There's over 65,000 ports. You're not going to need to know them all. And honestly, a lot of those ports end up being used for some dynamic thing anyway. Getting the 3,000. This range to this range is something Microsoft Dynamic port or whatever port. It's ephemeral. Yeah. So you're not going to need to know all those, but definitely know ones with like, okay, SSH, Telnet, FTP, SSL, HTTP. I think I unplugged myself, so I might be audio wise for a second. Put them back. Anyway, yeah. So let's SSH. SQL. Might need to know those. I don't want to put it all in there. Some of the stuff just look up on your own. It will be better that way. So that's all I had for layer 4 or layer. Definitely tired right now. Second video done today. Anyway, that's all I had for main 4, communication network security. As usual, I leave additional links in there to do further researching and go down the rabbit hole, particularly the cloud security playlists, inside cloud security playlist. I made a point to just listen to those passively in the background while I was doing any number of things, playing video games or whatever. So there's definitely something to that, but there's also something to the things you're getting stuck on in here, particularly the more popular, say, let's just say top 25 or so ports, which seem like a lot, but it's not that bad. The top 10 to 25 ports, write some of those down. The OSI, like things, if you haven't, this is why I kind of put the stuff on here the way I did, was specifically the stuff I either A, got stuck on, or B, needed to write down that it gets hinted out. As I said with previous domains, I'm going to repeat this for every one of these videos I do for the CISSP prep, is write stuff down, listen to stuff in the background if you have to, but definitely write stuff down, or type, sure, but also write it down. Any sort of charts, tables, write that stuff down. Like, make sure you get a good understanding of it. You don't have to dive deep into, but just real basic understanding. With that, I'm going to leave you with a trick question. So I mentioned I mentioned stuff about interview questions, right? And aside from like every now and then, me and some interviews I worked with in the past would throw out questions, not necessarily trick questions, but kind of like, is this person going to dig themselves into a hole if we give them false information or inaccurate question? And depending on, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In some cases, and I make a point whenever I'm asking trick questions, it's never going to be a false thing. It'll be some weird problem I've ran into in the past that may or may not have been a black and white answer. Or my favorite ones I like to ask are some weird scenario that has actually happened in an environment I worked in, where everything on the surface is fine, or everything is doing exactly what it's designed to do, and then there's some detail left out. So that's where I'll be like, are they going to give me? Let's see how their attention to detail is. And I don't necessarily ding them if they get it wrong, but I want to see how the answer is, how they come to an answer rather than what the answer is. Some people get it. I've had a couple of people get them. So what I'm going to leave you with this is, especially with this being communication network security, I'm going to leave you with this trick question. Feel free to answer it in the comments. Which port does ICMP run on? And with that, I'm gonna leave that as is, and feel free to answer that question in the comments. If the first person I see coming up with the correct answer, I will give you a thumbs up, a shout out on a following video. With that, have a good night and stay grinding.